Alright guys, welcome back to another episode of From the Hip. As always, I'm Johnny, I'll be your host, and this is Starla, the Hip World Hemp Bus. And we are broadcasting this week out from the farm, so I've got another beautiful podcast to share with you. If you didn't catch the one from last week, it should be popping up on a link right about there, and so you can go check that out. That was between Texas State Representative Gene Wu and hemp activist Karen Reeves, and it was really interesting. There's a lot of good content and stuff you probably did not know that might be going on in the legislative process and the advocacy side of hemp in the state of Texas. So this week we have a special episode, at least dear to my heart. We get to interview Paul Stanford, and so he joined us in the hemp bus at Texas HemstaLK. And again, we got to have a conversation that I'll get to share with you guys. Thank you to Paul for being part of the episode, but without any further ado, let's get from the hip. I have some idea who you are, but I'm still very much a novice. So for the sake of everyone else who might see this, can I ask you, tell us who you are?
Well, my name is Paul Stanford, and I've lived in Portland, Oregon since 1984. I've been a marijuana activist since basically my 18th birthday. I was never in the closet, even when I was in the U.S. Army, and I am a service-connected disabled veteran, currently with a 60% rating. I got out when I was still a teenager. Wasn't too indoctrinated yet. Just a week after my 18th birthday, I had heard about the Washington smoke-in in Washington, D.C., how a bunch of hippies, organized with the Yippie Party and Abby Hoffman and those folks, that they had this smoke-in at the White House. So a week after my 18th birthday, July 3rd and 4th, 1978, I went to my first marijuana event. There I saw some of my mentors, Dana Beal, Gatewood Galbraith, a few others. We had a rally in front of the White House for a couple of days. And at one point, there were phalanxes of police in 2 rows, 10 of them on horses, 10 of them on motorcycles, 10 of them. But we smoked out and said, bust us, because there were about 7,000 of us. And they couldn't bust 7,000. So we threw seeds on the White House lawn. Jimmy Carter was the president. He was a peanut farmer. And they were spraying this poison on Mexican marijuana at the time called paraquat that they would harvest it and sell it in the United States. And the people who smoked that would die from toxic lung stuff. And anyway, so we were saying paraquat peanuts is one of our chants. But anyway, I moved to the Northwest when I was 21, and I was named by this fellow named Kevin Zeese, who was the head of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws at the time, as the Washington State Director of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. So I did that. They sent me a big 16 millimeter reel. And we're talking 81, 82. Were you even born then?
I was actually.
Yeah. But just a little baby.
Yeah, 6.
Yeah. And then we went around and showed this reefer madness in various venues. So I learned about hemp, and this other fellow, Jack Herer, moved up. I met Jack Herer in Los Angeles in 1982 and stayed at his partner's head shop. And then both Jack and I moved to Oregon in 1984 to work on marijuana legalization. And in 84, we were kind of cheated off the ballot in a very public move by the Secretary of State. We gathered enough signatures to make the ballot. But it made it very easy to petition the following year, because people signed it, the petition to legalize marijuana, who said, I'm going to vote against this, but you were cheated. And so it made it easy. And we made the ballot in record time. And so on November 1st of 1985, we turned in enough signatures to put the vote of marijuana up in November of 1986. In fact, I happen to have a picture right here. So this is me on the edge and I am just 25 years old there. And then I have my hand on the green petitions. And in the back, with the glasses behind somebody else, that's Jack Herer, who wrote The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And at the time, Jack had 3 little children. And in 1985, cut and paste meant scissors and glue. No one had a computer. Personal computers weren't out yet. There were some experimental do-it-yourself Texas Instruments things, but there were no real personal computers. And so his little kids were getting in all his paperwork and to make the first edition of The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And we'd moved to Oregon and started growing marijuana to support the marijuana legalization initiative. And we lived about 3 blocks away from each other. And he came over to my house to get away from his kids and basically took over my house. I didn't have any children or family at the time. And put together the very first edition of The Emperor Wears No Clothes, which became kind of campaign literature for our initiative to legalize marijuana. And so we got on the ballot, and then the whole federal government came down on our head. It was back when Ronald Reagan was president. And basically, at one point, I got busted for growing pot and supporting the initiative, but nobody else got busted. They tried to pressure me to narc off. And so anyway, we lost that election, though, in which is like 27% of the, yeah, we got the news. It was the second, it was the second time that marijuana legalization had been voted on. The first time was in California in 1982, and they put marijuana legalization. It was ballot measure 19, which ironically was the same number in 2010 for the marijuana legalization vote in California. They were both Proposition 19. And, but the one was in 1982, the other one was in 2010. But in 1982, that was the 1972, not 82. That was the first time marijuana legalization was voted on. And it was funded by a group who were selling rolling papers made out of hemp or marijuana, amorphia. And some of the people are still around today who did that. Michael and Michelle Aldrich in San Francisco. They were some of the people that pioneered that in amorphia. Anyway, they lost with 36% of the vote in November of 1982. But then the Oregon legislature came back in 83, became the first state to decriminalize marijuana, make it where you just get a fine of $100. And then the initiative in 1985 for the vote in 86, ballot measure 5, that was the second vote. And that's the one where we lost with just 27%. Then there were several medical marijuana initiatives after that passed in multiple states. But the next one to just make it legal was Proposition 19 in 2010. But anyway, after studying and helping Jack with that book, I found that China had the world's largest hemp crop. And as I described to you before, I'm a service-connected disabled veteran. And so I get educational benefits in a program called Voc Rehab. And so I used my Voc Rehab to go back to school a total of 8 years. And I studied for 2 years in China. And the reason I studied in China is because they had the world's largest hemp crop. And so in 1988, I started locating and sourcing samples of hemp products. And in 1990 and 91, I started importing the first container loads of hemp paper. So I sold from 1990 through 1997 about 270 tons of hemp paper all across the United States. I worked with Greenpeace. I worked with lots of different environmental organizations. A lot of that is available still online through some of my websites out there. I've preserved some of the articles like in Vegetarian Times, and the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, things like that. So you can find these articles out there. And then in 1998, I couldn't really support my family through selling hemp paper anymore. I had to find something else to do. So I started doing this cable television show in Portland, Oregon in 1996, October 1996, called Cannabis Common Sense. And I still do that cable access television show. It's, I've done 1,196 episodes so far. And you can find it on Facebook at facebook.com/restorehemp. We have about 600,000 followers on that site. And you can also find it on YouTube at youtube.com/Cannabis Common Sense, all strung together. We don't have that many people that watch it on YouTube. It's an hour-long show. But I have interviews with tons of people going back many, many years, like Jack Harrer, Chris Conrad, a lot of the other people involved in marijuana legalization. I'm still doing it. Maybe I should interview you. And Elvie's been on about 15 or 20 times over the years. But I started organizing a HemstaLK festival in Portland, Oregon, kind of as a legalization and promote industrial hemp event in 2005. There had been some other hemp fests before that in Portland, and the police had always opposed those and opposed them getting a permit. In fact, there was one where the police put on a counter demonstration with SWAT cars and Corvettes and speedboats and helicopters right next to our hemp fest. I mean, like side by side. And I had to go to the city council many times to get our permit because the police wouldn't sign off on giving us a permit. But I always won in the end. But it was a lot of extra time and effort. Anyway, Justin James Bridges was one of our many performers and actors. He's appeared on our show, Cannabis Common Sense, many times over the years, playing music, talking about his work. And he went around the country doing a Cannabis Common Sense tour as well. So when he called and said, can I do HempstaLK in San Marcos? I said, well, you should just make it a Texas HempstaLK instead of just a San Marcos HempstaLK. That's a good idea. So he did. And so two other things I didn't mention. I'm talking just, but two other things I didn't mention is when I was 22, I was first arrested for blocking a train carrying hydrogen bomb warheads to the Trident submarines in Puget Sound of Washington. Made the front page of the New York Times. That's the first time I was arrested. Well, I was with a bunch of other protesters. And so there had been these protests. They were on the net television news on national broadcast, how this train from the Pantex Corporation in Amarillo, Texas, LV got busted in Amarillo. But in Amarillo, Texas, this from Pantex would carry hydrogen bomb warheads to the Puget Sound, and it went through Colorado and Montana, and there were things on the news about these big protests. So it came within about 15 miles of my house, so I went there, and I kind of followed. There were some people who organized and planned on getting busted, but I just did it spontaneous. And at that time, they didn't have a very serious charge. Later times, they charged people felonies for that, but this is the first time it was done, and so it got a lot of publicity. This one guy, Brian Wilson, he had it run over his legs and amputate two of his legs. They asked me if I would have let the train hit me, and I said, no, I would have jumped up on it, climbed to the top. I was a lot younger and skinnier then. But anyway, so that's one thing. And then probably the most significant thing I've done is through my cable television show, I invited first a lawyer, Paul Loney, on to co-host, and then I met this doctor right when we first were working on the marijuana legalization campaign, Dr. Philip Levesque, and I invited him to come on the TV show. And when medical marijuana became legal in Oregon in May 1st of 1999, people started flocking to our cable television studio to meet with Dr. Levesque and have him sign recommendations. So soon, I started doing clinics with Dr. Levesque in other places outside the TV studio, but all the first 20 were in our cable TV studio. And I opened an office, and I outgrew the office the first day. So I moved to another office that was twice as big, and I outgrew that office the first day. And then I found a much bigger office with a 5,000 square foot office and 5,000 square foot parking lot. And we moved there, and that satisfied as our headquarters. But I had people come from Washington State, which is just across the river from Portland, and say, we need a doctor in Washington. Well, I had been the Washington State Normal Coordinator before I moved to Oregon. So and my mom and sister and cousins and uncle lived up in Washington. So I went up and opened pretty close to my mom's house near Seattle, Bellevue, Washington. Started seeing patients there, and we got overwhelmed with business. And I opened in Honolulu, and I opened in Denver, I opened in Missoula, Montana, I opened in Phoenix, Arizona, I opened in Detroit, Michigan. I opened in 9 states, and we saw patients all together in 60 different cities, working with more than 40 different doctors. And we've helped over 270,000 Americans get a license to legally possess, use, and grow medical marijuana. And so I'm still doing that with a much smaller number of people. Back in 2016, I endured a hostile corporate takeover by an Israeli natural gas company funded by George Soros. And they came in, it's called Adira Energy, an offshore natural gas driller from Israel. And they were on the Toronto and Frankfurt stock exchanges. So they came in and gave a little bit of money to our initiative to legalize, because I was a spokesperson to legalize marijuana in Oregon. So I financed putting marijuana legalization on the ballot in Oregon for a vote in 2012. So when Colorado won with Measure 64 and Washington passed 91, we lost in Oregon with 47% of the vote. But then we came back in 2014 and won then. But these people came in with forgeries and lawyers, very expensive lawyers, who in the end filed 35,000 pages of gobbledygook. And how do you hire a lawyer? I spent $160,000 on lawyers in about 6 months, and then I just defended myself. And then I basically demanded a jury trial, and they dismissed their case 3 weeks before I was supposed to have a jury. They knew they'd lose with the jury. No jury was. They paid the judges. In fact, the judge who gave my company to them was called out by the prosecutor of my county in Portland, Oregon, for being corrupt, and they quit putting cases in front of her like 6 months after she gave my company away. But anyway, the only way I could go back and get my stuff back from them would be to sue them in America and Canada. I don't have the money to fight those guys, but they ripped off all my landlords in all those different states. They ripped off all my doctors. And in the end, one doctor continued to operate in Portland until last September, and he retired. And now we've got all our old patients back, and our business has more than doubled. I've gone from tangentially being able to meet the bills by selling off my stuff and running up credit card debt, till now I can afford to come here. I can start paying my debts off. So I've kind of won in the end. The old phone number that I lost in 2016 now rings back in my office. Yeah. So that's a lot of my path so far. So my wife and I are the only ones that work in our clinic anymore. And we continue to help about 120, mainly Oregon, but also Washington State patients, working with 2 doctors in a Portland office.
Wow, how amazing is it that Paul has put in so much effort through the years, and that there are people out there fighting for those kind of things for all of us. Marijuana legalization and the hemp industry being able to thrive and build all these products and stuff for our homes and ways to get the bad out and good in. They couldn't be doing all that if there wasn't people like Paul out there who have done the legwork, put in the foundations, and done all these different things to show us how we can do this, or to make sure we continue to get this kind of reform going, so we can help our farmers, we can help our communities, we can help our environment. Don't forget, guys, this was only episode 1. Tune in next week and we'll have episode 2, where you can see and hear more from Paul and what all he's done to help push the industry and what's brought him all the way up to where we met there at the Texas HemstaLK. I'm super grateful for them for inviting us and having us there. Super grateful for Paul and everyone else who came in and interviewed, and for checking out all of our hemp flooring and our hemp insulation and all of our Willie's Remedy products and our other hemp industry products that we were able to showcase and show people how you can get the bad out and the good in. Thanks again, guys. Remember, it's our hip world. Stay shiny. I'm out.